Hi everyone, I'm Albert. I'm a product engineer here at Slash. Joining me is Kevin.
Hey guys, I'm Kevin. I'm one of the co-founders here at Slash, and today we're going to be talking about the Facelift, which was a massive effort by primarily Albert, but also the rest of the team.
It took approximately like 5 months, and just for some context on what the Facelift is, it's like a complete UI overhaul of our product. Yeah, and we'll go into like why we did it, the engineering behind it, and all the design decisions that we made.
There was a lot of thought that went behind the Facelift. So I think this is mainly going to be like a discussion around all the conversations we had over the 5 months and kind of like a reflection of how it went and like, yeah, maybe some lessons that we learned that we'll be able to take going forwards into the future.
So there were two like main reasons for the Facelift. Like first one being that we just had our Series B fundraising announcement. For that, we did like a big brand refresh. So we got like a new color scheme, we got like a new landing page, and like basically just redid our entire like brand and our presence. And along with that, we wanted our product to match. So that was like the main reason. But also like on the engineering side, and obviously we know like we accumulated a lot of tech debt over the last 3 years of like you guys scaling super quickly, making design decisions like on the fly. Maybe we can go into depth about like what those like tech debt points were and like what decisions we made that like potentially didn't scale, because like that was the other main reason for the Facelift. It was like
100%.
to clean up the entire front end code base, to make sure that like over the next 3 years, the next however many years, that we could have like a really solid foundation for our design system.
Compared to the new version, our old version just looks really, really, really bad now. That's also another big motivator.
Yeah, we wanted to just like bring Slash like into modern times.
Yeah. No, I think like when we were thinking about the Facelift, one of the biggest things that I was thinking about was Slash 2.0, which you weren't here when we did that, but that was an initiative we did like, I want to say 3 years ago now. 3 years ago, we were like, look, we're going to rebuild the entire product. We have a ton of tech debt. We're going to do this massive launch on like business and personal accounts for our customers. And so we created a new repo called Web App 2, and we decided to build everything up from the ground up and decide to sprint on that project. I think we did a launch roughly around the same time that we did this launch. It was like October of 2022, and that was horrible. We had bugs. Like the next 3 months, we call it like the Slash 2.0 hangover now. The next 3 months, the whole team was on call fixing issues, adding in missing screens from the old product, just because we wanted to like redo a bunch of infrastructure, which was honestly very nice at the time. 3 years later, a lot of the infrastructure also we decided we had to like revisit it, because honestly, like a big reason is that the state of front end today is way better than it was.
Way better.
Way better than it was 3 years ago. Was way better than it was 5 years ago when we started the Slash code base. Everything from like TypeScript frameworks to like design systems to design tokens to component libraries.
Yeah.
Like everything has just gotten like 10x better, which I think was also a big thing, at least for us. Like people were using like Tailwind and stuff in their personal projects. They really, really liked it, but we didn't have that. Yeah, I guess like we evaluated a ton of like different things to use and component libraries, but I guess like you kind of made the bulk of those decisions.
Yeah.
So maybe like, what was like the decision-making process there?
Let's start with probably the CSS framework / library that we decided to use. For a bit of context, like you set up the original Kevin by Design system. Yeah. And that was built on top of Emotion, which is a CSS in JS library, and it create style sheets at runtime. And the advantage of a CSS and JS like library, as we could see in our code base, was that it was really easy to co-locate like styles with the markup of components. So you didn't need like a separate CSS file or anything, right? And you didn't have to like create arbitrary class names, and that was like really great.
Yeah. Things are also dynamic as well. Like
things are dynamic.
The DX felt nice for sure.
The DX is honestly still really nice for CSS and JS. And the reason we migrated away from Emotion, or really like took a look at other non-runtime alternatives, is because of one, we saw performance bottlenecks with Emotion. So if you look at the flame charts, right, when rendering like large table views and scrolling quickly and virtualizing lists, it gets really difficult to render everything at 60 FPS when you're generating style sheets dynamically. And you can see it in the like performance breakdown.
100%. I think like at the beginning, you're like, this shit doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Like super quickly, like you start having lists with like components within components, hundreds of list items, and then it's like I remember running a test. It was like, let's render a div with like text inside of it in a massive list, and let's do the same thing with our design system. And like the list with text inside of it, I forget the exact benchmark, but it was like several times faster than the design system, and it was just like, wow, like we eventually got to solve this at some point.
Yeah. So the decision we ended up making, as we referenced before, was Tailwind. And there were two finalists for like our CSS choice. Like one was Panda CSS, which had a DX that was very similar to our current design system. So that was like the one pro going for Panda CSS, is that there potentially wasn't as big of a learning curve because it used sort of like a CSS in JS sort of like props based interface, I guess.
Yeah, it's like similar to styled system, where you have like MX, PX props. And I think like one cool idea there was like maybe we could potentially cogen and like do AST transformations on a lot of our files. That also seemed like a very tough challenge. And
there would be like a ton of edge cases, especially because like we eventually started co-locating a lot of like the business logic with like the style rendering. Like we would have like Booleans within like switching between like different styles of like PX or whatever it might be. And which would have made like AST transformation very hard. So the reason why we ended up going with Tailwind is because like one, our developers were already super familiar with it. A lot of our engineers like built side projects of their own or like were founders and like had used Tailwind extensively throughout all their like side projects.
Yeah, I guess like you were that example as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like I loved Tailwind, you know? And as far as like it just being a personal preference, like it also means that Tailwind is a very mature ecosystem. I guess that's not why, but like Tailwind is a very mature ecosystem. So like the tooling around it has become like really, really good. Tailwind v4 is like really, really good. And another added benefit is that like AI is like really familiar with writing a lot of Tailwind. And honestly, that's like was a pretty big advantage for us when trying to refactor like tons and tons of code, right? Like it didn't have to learn a brand new like K-by design system. It didn't have to like know all these props. Like like AI is just like very good with Tailwind, and it can just like pump out a lot of it and like quite high quality as well. And that was like one of the reasons we switched to Tailwind.
Like a side note on AI and LLMs is we actually did a bunch of testing, creating prompt files on our old design system. And eventually like we'd have this like 10,000 token like prompt file that would read our old design system super well and it wouldn't make mistakes. But then on a day-to-day, like when you don't include that prompt file and you're just like, oh, like reference this file and like build out this new component, oftentimes like the LM would just like hallucinate and start including Tailwind tokens and a bunch of random stuff. And I guess like in general, like when you're building, like you don't really want to think about including prompt files. And I think that's why like choosing the tools that like all these LMs are already trained on is just so much nicer than like the upstream battle of like, oh, let's make it really good at like our very custom stuff.
Yeah. And someone might say like, oh, why don't you just like include it in like the cursor empty or whatever? But then it's like, oh, like what if you paste a code snippet into Claude or like ChatGPT, right? Like you don't want to have to also include the prompt like in there, right? In your browser or whatever. Right? Yeah, it's just like a bunch of mental overhead.
Yeah, you just don't want to think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
One really cool thing that you did was set up our like Figma, Tailwind design token system. Yeah, maybe it makes sense to give context over how we actually go from design, like how do we go from product to design then to code. I think what's different about Slash to a lot of companies, and it's probably a very surprising thing for many people, is we actually don't have an in-house design team. We work with a design agency overseas called Metacarbon, so huge shout out to them. They are extremely reliable, awesome, really, really good. And they work super closely with us to essentially spit out these designs that we want to work on, including doing things like the facelift, where they will actually like help us iterate over a bunch of designs and we kind of work with them to figure out what do we want the final product to look like. But one thing there is like, they're kind of like a distributed team from us. They work out of Ukraine. They work overnight. We work during the day. And they're kind of like the ones who are in Figma all day, setting up a bunch of these design tokens that we've like aligned on. And we wanted something more automated than just copying and pasting and maintaining a style sheet. So I don't know, maybe you want to talk about that process.
100%. Like we just wanted a system where we could go from decisions in Figma, and in Figma is where the like core design thinking and decisions actually live. And then there's no like decision making to go from that into like our actual code base, you know? So in Figma, there's things called like variables, and there's things called styles and typographies and whatnot. And that's where we want Metacarbon to like live, right? We don't want them to have to worry about the code, and they will put together these like collections, for example, like light mode, dark mode, with all these like token values. So I'll use colors as like the most illustrative example. Like they'll create a baseline color palette, right? So we're not just using like the default like Tailwind color palette or whatever, because we want one that matches our brand. So they'll create like a baseline set of color palettes, and then on top of that, we also have like a semantic layer, right? So this might include tokens like in a Tailwind style, it might be like BG, neutral, subtle, default, right? And that would denote like background, neutral, subtle, and then default is like the modifier, whether it's like on hover or like on active or things like that, right? All you have to think about is like, okay, this is like the name of the actual value that we want to apply, right?
Some like semantic level naming that
Exactly.
is easy to reason about.
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't want to have to be using like, you know, product gray like 1000 in your code base. Then it makes it really hard to reason about like what actually is going on when you're creating components, right?
Yeah.
So we have all these things in Figma. So we use a tool called Supernova to extract out these tokens into like a Tailwind V4 like style sheet, basically. Supernova is a great tool, but we're not like locked into them. Basically, like we just wanted any tool to sort of like extract the variables out from Figma into like a very basic CSS style sheet that we ourselves could then transform, right? So in this case, we use Supernova. They have a great Tailwind V4 plugin, and then we get the output of that, and then in-house, which is like what we built. And on a side note, like at Slash, one of our philosophies is to maintain control. So for example, in this case, like we didn't want to relinquish all our control to Supernova and like the configurations that they had. Rather, we would rather maintain a build script in-house that sort of like transforms it into like the output that we want, right? So one challenge that we ran into when working with like the Supernova output is like semantic naming clashes, right? And what that means is like, let's say you have tokens in your Figma that are called like BG, neutral, subtle, for example, right? But if you're familiar with Tailwind V4, like the color utility will actually generate like prefixed versions of those tokens, right? So if you did like -- color -- BG surface neutral default or whatever, you would get class names that are like BG neutral default. And then you would also get things like text BG neutral default, right? And that we definitely didn't want, right? Because it would allow like, first of all, it was just ugly to have to do like BG, but it also generated a bunch of colors that like didn't make any sense, like text BG, like there's no semantic meaning to that, right? So in our build script pipeline, what we do is we transform the Supernova output into like generated like utility classes, or at least this was the first version. We generated utility classes for each individual one. And like, I don't think that's a thing that Supernova supports. I could be wrong, but like the core point is that we wanted to maintain control of this build script so that we could extend it in the future, right? An example of an extension would be like the divide color property, right? So in Tailwind, you can have like divide, and that will put a divider with border width and border color. And we wanted to enable that, and that we wanted to like match our semantic like class names to like our border width, our border color like properties, right? So like there's just all these different examples, and there's a couple more, like all these different examples of like things that like may or may not be enabled by Supernova, but we just don't want to be vendor locked in. And this is like a script that's like simple enough to sort of like code up ourselves and maintain such that like it's super worth it. And it allows us like a lot more flexibility within our pipeline, right?
Yeah. How long did that take, like setting that pipeline up?
Yeah, so I mean, the first version of that pipeline didn't take too long, but an important note is that like we constantly iterate over these things, right? So the first version of our pipeline just like blindly spit out these like utility class names. And then one of our like engineers that joined later, Sam, who's a really good front-end engineer, he found like a sort of like Tailwind cheat sheet of all these like theme variable namespaces. I'm not sure if that's exactly what they're called, but these like theme variable namespaces for Tailwind that aren't like officially documented, but he used those instead to make like the build script a lot more elegant, and it's more of like a find and replace now, right? Like the very first version maybe took like a day to half a day to actually code it up, but like, you know, the overall thinking behind like this entire pipeline was to just like make the entire pipeline like as brainless to like the consumer as possible, right?
No, 100%. Yeah, and I guess now it's like we have the script, and anything we want to extend on top of it is just super easy to maintain.
Exactly. Yeah. Whenever Metacarbon adds new tokens, right, they automatically just get synced into our code base. We can just review it, and I mean, it looks good, and then we can just like commit the code, and then yeah.
No, makes a lot of sense. I guess the next one to talk about would just be the headless component libraries, and I think after that we can talk into like how we actually execute across all of this, which I think is a super cool story and a lot of work. But yeah, like I think you spent a lot of time evaluating like if we want to build our own headless component library, do we want to use something out of the box? There's like a lot of existing ones, and you spent like probably like a couple weeks on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So like one thing I want to mention up front is like the question might come up is like, why didn't we use like a style solution, right? For example, very popular one, Shadcn, right? The thinking there is that like we as a brand, as Slash, want our own styles, right? And we don't want to just like have the styles of like some default out of the box thing, although it would make it more convenient. So we wanted full control of our styles. So like a style solution just didn't make sense, right? Like Material UI, right? Shadcn, like those things just like didn't make sense because we wanted full control.
Yeah.
So for a headless library, a headless one is like one that includes no styles out of the box, but just has the actual functionality. We evaluated Radix, which was sporadically used in like the design system V1.
Yeah.
We
very infrequently.
Yeah, very infrequently.
I think it's also I think it's used in Shadcn as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So we evaluated Radix, we evaluated Base UI, and React Aria. Radix was good, and I think a lot of our developers had used Radix before. I certainly had. But we weren't sure about like the future, and we saw that its maintainers had moved on to Base UI, which is where we actually found Base UI. And we didn't want to work with like a potentially dead library, or like one that would become unmaintained far into the future, or shortly into the future.
Right.
You know, React Aria was a super strong choice. It's very feature complete, but I think it's just like very opinionated, and it requires the developer to sort of like buy into the entire React Aria ecosystem, and that's just not something that we really wanted to lock ourselves into. And Base UI, whenever I was just building components with it, it was just a lot simpler and, you know, less opinionated about things, and we could do things our way. And it was also like very feature complete for the components that it did have. Right. Maybe it included a couple less components because Base UI is a very new library, but we saw that Base UI had really good maintainers, and we had faith that like it would grow alongside Slash as well. And that's ultimately like kind of why we chose Base UI. It was relatively unopinionated, got everything that we needed to like to work very like relatively easily, and it didn't like sort of lock ourselves into like some way of thinking.
No, 100%. And I think it's like we have a lot of flexibility now too, in the sense that not all components are built with Base UI. Our date picker we built with React Aria actually. And we still have some old components. Our table views, our buttons, and a few other components are built just by hand, where we maintain the accessibility. But also maintaining accessibility is very painful. So that's definitely why something like Base UI is super nice. What was like the final decision that you're like, okay, we're definitely just using Base? Like, was there like a breaking point, or was it more of just like, it just seemed like the best option?
Yeah, definitely. Like I went through the work of actually trying to implement a couple components, like many components in both systems. And like, I think it was just much more, I just had to read a lot more of the React Aria docs. And maybe that's a feature for React Aria, right? Like you're forced to sort of buy into the ecosystem. But to me, Base UI was just like much easier to work with when literally just trying to make the same styled component in both libraries.
Right.
And that was ultimately like what drove the decision.
Yeah, and I guess Base UI also pushes the concept of like compound components, which Shadcn also does. I think that's also one of the big shifts that we did around the new design system, which is, or just new Facelift, is so many components now we just completely switched the API over, and it's honestly been super nice to work with. But I think you've spent a ton of time like deliberating between compound components, using the existing our old prop-based way of styling things, controlling
Yeah.
features.
Let's give some context on
Yeah.
like why like compound components is like why we're even talking about this. Basically,
I guess first, like, what is compound components?
yeah. Yeah. So like in React, there's like many different ways to write a component, but two very popular ways of like writing these complex components are like a props-based interface where you sort of like pass all the configuration options within the prop, and then the component sort of just like handles all the markup and business logic internally. And compound components is like an architecture where you relinquish control of the markup to the parent, actually. So the component internally, it will often use something like the context API to track sort of the internal business logic or the internal state of the component. But then the parent is actually responsible for like rendering each individual component, so it has control of the markup. A lot of our previous components in the old design system were built off like this props-based pattern, which on the surface is like super elegant, right? Let's say you have like a searchable single select component. All you have to do is like provide these props, maybe the data, maybe the search fields that you want to search through, and maybe like a header or a footer component of the actual like content. And then it's like, boom, it renders it all, and you don't have to remember the markup of the component to be able to use the searchable single select. Which is why, you know, we used it in the first place.
100%.
The reason that doesn't scale is because eventually engineers will sort of like add use cases, and you know, many times they're very valid use cases onto these components that they weren't originally like designed for, right? So you might get like a render trigger prop, right? Or like a render footer prop, right? And then you end up having to write markup in the props of the component anyways.
Yeah.
And then you sort of like have to do all these like prop hacks and drill into the component itself.
Yeah.
And it just becomes like super painful to maintain.
Yeah.
And like we noticed this across our code base, and we started calling them like God components. You know, God objects is like a concept in object-oriented programming where like an object or like something just handles too much responsibility.
Yeah.
And like our searchable single select was a great example. Like that thing just handled like way too much responsibility and had way too many configuration options. And it was like very painful for developers to use because of it, because like you weren't sure which of these were like a hack, even with the comments, which of these are a hack and like which of these are like necessary.
Yeah. I guess like you end up having like these random props like should fetch on first render except when like XYZ. And you look at the code and you're like, why does this use effect exist? Why is it based off this one prop?
Exactly.
Which is at the end of the day like technically bad design, but I guess there probably aren't any production code bases that are truly very clean. And so at some point you kind of have to like, at some point, if your baseline like thinking and baseline like way of like writing components isn't super sound, that'll end up happening. Maybe it'll end up happening with compound components, but at least as of now, it seems like all the use cases we've wanted to support like worked really nicely with the API.
Yeah. So the downside of compound components on the surface is like you have to sort of know how to use this markup, right? So for example, the searchable single select, you have to know that you have to, okay, I have to render a trigger, and then I have to render the content, which contains the popover information.
Right.
Then I have to render the items, right? I have to render the search bar. Maybe I have to render the footer, right? But the advantage is that like now it's super composable. So for example, if you don't want the footer, you just don't put it in the markup. Right. If you don't need like a loading state, or you don't want to have the search bar, just don't include it in the markup. If you want to extend the markup to like, you know, you have a warning signal for like when you actually save something in the footer, right? Then you can just put it in the actual component, like, and if you do that enough times, maybe it warrants its spot in the actual like underlying API.
Yeah.
Then at least you wouldn't have like preemptively added it as like a prop called like render warning message or something. Very complex components like this benefit greatly from this like composability.
Yeah.
And like you can even build like, you know, a layer on top of this where it like, if you get tired of writing the markup too much, you have like a default searchable single select that just like has this prop-based interface, but you have to be very careful that doesn't end up as like a God component itself. It's almost like Lego blocks, right? Having the available Lego blocks for you to use when building components is just like, it's so powerful.
Yeah. I guess it's like when we design that base layer API right, then you get the best of both worlds.
You just have to make sure that like the default options are really good, such that like 95% of the time, like all you have to use is like default trigger, default items, right?
Yeah.
And it will just like look and function like perfectly. you know.
100%. I think that was also a big issue with our old design system, which when you wanted to use some component, especially table views, which I would say still isn't solved today, like you have to include like 4 or 5 additional props, style it the way you kind of wanted to, whereas it would be nice if you just import one component and it just works and it's dialed nicely out of the box the way you expect it every single time.
Yeah.
Probably makes sense to talk about the implementation phase. It was a 5-month long project, which
Yeah.
I think for context usually isn't the size of most projects. Most projects are 1 week, 2 weeks to like a couple months at most for something large. So it took a long time, but I also think we avoid a lot of pitfalls where there have been next to like no major bugs.
Yeah.
Customers largely haven't complained and love the outcome. But I know that you went through this entire journey.
Yeah.
Describe it a lot like an NBA season. It's like,
Yeah.
so you had the regular season, we had the playoffs, we had the finals.
Yeah.
What was that from your perspective?
You know, when the facelift was like first thought up, right, it was thought to be just like, oh, it's just like sort of a UI overhaul, right? And if it was just that, I don't think it would have taken nearly as long if we were just like swapping out the colors and like the layout and whatnot, right? But then we realized like, oh, this is a great chance to eliminate a lot of the front end tech debt. And then we were like, oh, let's just like redo the front end basically, like as a whole. And that's what sort of like kept expanding the scope of the project to where it just became like, okay, let's just like make really good design decisions and like overhaul most of the front end code. Making a lot of design decisions up front, I think, at least what I've learned is like it makes a lot of sense to spend good thought and like good time on those decisions. Because if you don't, you just sort of run into like the error of your like decision making basically. Right? Like it makes sense to spend some time truly evaluating like base UI versus like React Aria or like Tailwind versus Panda CSS, right? Or even like, you know, different form management solutions, right? Like Zod versus like Archetype, React Hook Form versus like TanStack Form, right? Like it makes sense to like evaluate those things. You shouldn't ever get stuck in a place of like analysis paralysis, but you shouldn't also just like fire from the hip. Is at least what I've learned. And like, you know, at Slash, we like to move quickly, but like when you're making these like underlying design decisions, it makes sense to like spend your time on them, right? Because it gets super painful when you like have to backtrack.
Yeah, and I would say something also context-based, like it would be ridiculous to spend a month in like evaluating options for like a 3-week project.
Yeah.
Or a project that should take 3 weeks, but in the case of our like design system, our front end, these are foundations, I guess, that will be used for hopefully the next 5 years, the next 10 years. So
yeah,
hopefully it stands the test of time. But I think if anything, like at the minimum, it'll last the next 3-4 years. And so that like, I guess it was like a month of exploration up front.
Yeah, a month of exploration and like setting things up, right? So like, you know, we didn't have Tailwind in our code base pretty much at all, right? So we, you know, got that up and running along with like the, you know, Supernova, you know, Figma to Supernova to code pipeline, right? That along with like the other headless libraries, like form management. Yeah, like it was about maybe a month, maybe 3 weeks of that exploration. And then I sort of like hit the ground running, making a lot of our like base components, right? And this is where sort of like a lot of the like grunt work is just like, it just has to get done. And there's just like a lot of it, right? If you look at our product and if you look at just any modern software product that's out there, there's just a lot of components. And each of those components, it might, you know, like seem simple on the surface, but each of those are like crafted with a lot of care. And especially in our case, right? 100%. So Metacarbon designs like many variants of like even just a button, right? We have tons of variants of buttons, searchable selects, right? Tabs, panels, modals, and things like that. Like each of these has to be like designed and implemented with care. Make sure that like accessibility is good. Make sure that DX is good. So like developers can't shoot themselves in the foot. That's a big part, by the way, because like if a developer has to think about accessibility, then I have done my job poorly because not everyone is going to think about accessibility. Right.
Especially when you have like a 1-week deadline. And customers yelling at you and you get something at the door.
You're not thinking about like keyboard, you know. So I would say that took maybe about like another 4 weeks or so. Like, and that was just like a lot of work. And like, frankly, it got a little demoralizing because like, it's not like a project that you can release in parts, or a quick project that you can get like a lot of customer love from afterwards, right? It's like you sort of like work alone in the shadows, like on base components that take a lot of care, but like, you know, nobody gets to see it. Like once you finish something, you finish this component, nobody gets to see it yet. Because like one thing that we wanted to do with the facelift is like, we didn't want to have some parts of the page facelifted and some parts not facelifted.
Yeah. Like what was that, like when you were in a route, because that would have been like 2 months working on the same project with like very little, like, very little to show for it. Like, how did you get through that? Or what was the process like to turn that into something that was still successfully pushed months later?
One is that like coming to work every day was still a lot of fun. Like, you know, the people at Slash like are a lot of fun to be around. So like coming to work never felt like that much of a drag. So like it was always fun. At least to be in the office and like be surrounded by people. We like hid basically everything behind a feature flag that was only enabled for our company account. Right, and we also had this like really nice toolbar where like you could toggle on Command J and then you could toggle on and off the facelift, like just in production locally, like wherever, and it wouldn't like refresh the page or anything. So you could very easily like spot regressions, and like if you wanted to test a page, you could see like, boom, okay, facelift on, facelift off, facelift on, facelift off, right? And it was really easy to spot differences. You know, the downside of that is like you end up with a lot of branching code in your front end in the meantime. But a big advantage is that like internally, we were able to dog food our own product. We were able to spot edge cases because Slash runs on Slash, which is honestly a huge advantage. Because like then we can just be our own internal like QA testing,
100%,
right? Which is super nice. But to bring it back to the transactions page, like after I had like a baseline set of components, so for example, the table views, the buttons, the modals, the panels, I tried implementing like the entirety of the transactions page, right? And I demoed that to the team. And that was like a nice little dopamine hit because then everyone's like, oh, this guy just hasn't been like doing nothing for the last 2 months, right? He's actually doing stuff. Okay, this looks sick. Okay, that's cool.
I remember that was a super cool demo because I think at least when I saw it, when the team saw it, it was like, wow, our UI could be amazing. Because up until then it was good, but it was good. It did the job, but it wasn't anything close to world class.
And like that was really nice to just like, you know, realize, okay, like we're actually moving, we're getting somewhere. People appreciate the work that I'm doing, right? And honestly, I think that's like a pretty underrated part of like giving demos, which is something that we do like every week. Engineers will show off their work and give demos to the rest of the team. And it's just like, one, it gives context to the rest of the team on what we do. And two, it's just like really nice. Like it's a nice moment of appreciation for the engineers a lot of the time.
100%. And I guess like one thing to note is that you're still merging to main like every day, several times a day.
Exactly.
So it wasn't like you were working out of like a massive branch that we had to like merge and hopefully there were no regressions.
Yeah. That was a big advantage of like the decision we made up front to sort of like not want to do that, right? We definitely didn't want to like just maintain one single branch like off of main and then just like work on it for months and then merge it in with one big push. That would have been horrendous.
That would have been so scary.
I
don't think the project would have ever gotten shipped if we did that.
That would, especially because there are so many people shipping new features on the old design system on main, right? So it just made more sense to like actually have our code architected in a way such that I could push to main, but it wouldn't affect any of our customers, and we could still test it. I think we got like the best of most worlds. Obviously the downside being that like the code is a bit uglier when you actually have to branch, but I think that's like sort of an inevitability. It's either that or like merge conflicts. I'm like, bro, you know, the reality of introducing like large amounts of code into an existing code base is like, it's going to be a bit messy, especially in a transition period. And you might just have to accept that. If you have a clean way of going about it, at least it will be manageable. And I think it was like manageable for us.
100%. I remember there was some turning point where it stopped being, oh, like Albert is maintaining this like separate like feature flag part of the system, and engineers, when they built new features on top of like some part of the product, they would actually just implement both versions of that. I think that felt like a turning point in the project. How do we get there from like the original like transactions page to like when that ended up happening?
That probably happened just like when I started shipping the cards page, and I realized like, wait, most of the underlying components are feature complete and they're done, right? One nice thing with shipping the transactions page was that I was able to spot a lot of like missing edge cases with the components, right? Maybe accessibility things or like maybe like use cases that I didn't cover in the original like components, because it's really hard to like think about every use case, for example, like where a searchable single select might be used, and then design your API around like every single one of those search like use cases if you just like haven't used it anywhere in your product yet because it's not facelifted, you know? So like ripping one page like actually made me go back to the drawing board a bit, tweak some components, and then I went to the cards page and I realized, wait, okay, these are actually mostly pretty good. And then which allowed like other engineers to like use the underlying component system and, you know, not shoot themselves in the foot, basically. Right. And yeah, there was a short period where like we would implement sort of like features in both the old and the new design system. But I think once we crossed a turning point of like, you know, okay, most of the pages are actually done, we would, unless the like feature was super urgent, we would just have people rip it in the new design system and then trust that once it got launched, their feature would be launched alongside of it.
100%. I think that was also roughly when we probably started Hack Week, which I think was a super cool thing we did in the sense that we had a lot of new people joining the team, all of our interns. It was like I think it was like close to 1 month in. I think that was the start when we had like 6-7 people working on the facelift for like a few weeks at a time. But I feel like that was like a great like bonding moment of the team for new people, old people, like one common goal.
Hack Week was awesome. For context, like the Hack Week that we did was like we went out to, I don't know, Bass Lake. And we just like coded for like 7 days straight, basically. But that was sort of the week where we sort of like kicked off internally, like, okay, like if you're working on new features or even old features, like you're either like going to be working on the facelift or like another project, but like a bunch of engineers would be responsible for ripping pages, new pages in the facelift or pages that like they had previously worked on, but that needed to be facelifted. Right. And I want to give a huge shout out to like all the engineers that I worked with during this period. And it wasn't just Hack Week, it was Hack Week and like a couple weeks after, right? Because they held a lot of the historical context of like pages that maybe I hadn't seen the front end code for. And they were much more familiar with like the edge cases, what it's supposed to do, and the business logic. So it was much easier for me to just teach them how to use the new components, the new design system. And they could be like, oh, okay, like I did this, you know, a couple months ago, let me just like facelift it. Right. And that gave me like a bunch of extra hands and was like super, super helpful. I think like one particular shout out I want to give is like to one of our newer engineers, Sam, who took the initiative to set up Storybook and Chromatic, which ended up being really crucial for like information sharing across the team, right? When you're introducing a lot of new engineers to like a new design system, oftentimes it's really difficult to share the knowledge of like how these components are supposed to be used, especially compound components, a pattern that like they've never seen across the code base before, or like Tailwind, if they're not familiar with Tailwind, although most of them were. Storybook is just like a great place for documenting like all these usage patterns. And like, I don't think the project would have gone nearly as smoothly if Sam hadn't taken the initiative to just like set all of that up basically himself, single-handedly, and also chromatic testing to like catch regressions. So that was like another lesson learned, which is like, it's worth to invest in tools and systems that enable very quick like information sharing.
And I think the one turning point is this is probably the first time where we've had more than 5-6 engineers working on the front end at the same time, which is one, kind of crazy, but two, the reason why we probably didn't set it up before. But it really just did take Sam to set it up for us to realize, oh wow, like we were well past the point. This would be super useful.
It was it's super good.
I think around just the way we tackled the facelift, because we didn't really know how exactly we were going to tackle it. We just knew let's take it like 1 week at a time. But I think one of the biggest like things that I've noticed was like we were able to get like a complete rehaul of the front end. It didn't take a crazy amount of end resources in the sense that it wasn't like the whole team was blocked off from shipping product for like 5 months. It was like one out of 10, 15 engineers, where you were able to just like kind of dive deep. And it really was like a few weeks of work where it's like, okay, let's move a bunch of people onto this one project. Let's get it out successfully. Once they were done, you kind of took back over to like ensure like the full rollout was smooth. And yeah, I think shipping things that way is a great way of like tackling like really, really large initiatives that just improve the velocity of the entire team once they're done without really sacrificing the immediate like productivity of the team.
Yeah, yeah. I guess one thing we should also talk about is like how we actually started rolling it out to customers. I mentioned before we had it on a feature flag. So like we could just toggle the feature flag on for customers that we were familiar with. And it was like no extra engineering effort to sort of do that. We just talked to sales like, hey, who are the guys you're closest with? Who are the teams that would be willing to try out sort of a beta version of our facelifted product? Right. And we would just give them access and then, you know, communicate with them.
Yeah. And there were bugs. And the good thing about doing the rollout this way is that when there were bugs, they could just toggle the facelift off, do what they had to do, and it was okay.
Yeah. So like for context, we gave people the ability to turn the facelift off during the experimental phase. So like they wouldn't actually be blocked on any workflows that like either we hadn't implemented yet or were buggy. So like they were basically just like helping us test the facelift and, you know, not blocked at all, which was honestly really great. One thing that we learned from the facelift and just doing this project as a whole is that it's worth it to sort of like raise the floor of your entire engineering org when it comes to like, you know, parts of the code base. Right. So for us, this meant like raising the floor of the front end code that we write in the code base, which means like making sure people don't just like use local state for like form management, right? And make sure they're following, you know, the patterns that we set, right? For example, for us, it was like archetype and like 10 stack form, right? And it means like, oh, following the compound component architecture, right? Which means that you have to like sort of take the initiative to teach other engineers, this is how like, you know, this is how things are done. And like, because the code that they write will sort of like compound over time. And like, if they write bad code, it will like, you know, compound downwards over time. And when they write good code, it will like, you know, scale well. And it just means like, yeah, instead of like thinking, oh, like a small percent of the engineers are responsible for a large part of the code, like front end code base, and they will write the best code. It's like, no, like you should raise the level of the entire engineering org, which is, I think, quite a bit harder. It's like you have to teach everyone sort of like the way of thinking about things the correct way on the front end. And like doing that, I think has actually paid dividends a long ways.
Yeah. I think one of the big shifts, like I wish we could almost measure out the hours a day spent pair programming at Slash over like the past like few years. And I think right now it's probably the most it's ever been. I think if you're in the office and you walk around, like there's always two people having some impromptu conversation or working through some project. Yeah, we don't have like we don't like put these two people together, but I think kind of one thing that has been super conducive to like raising the floor is just the fact that whenever like people now know Albert knows everything about the facelift, and Albert just spends, and when you spend like an hour kind of going over one specific concept on the facelift, that compounds into like dozens of hours saved in the future because because you can't be doing everything on the facelift either.
And like, you know, that person, once they learn about the patterns, they can teach it to other people. It's also a big advantage of like all of us being in person is like, if I'm talking about something, other people, you know, might tag on and listen. And then, you know, we're all sharing knowledge at like the fastest pace possible.
Yeah. I think there are so many just times where I'm listening to a conversation and I'm like, oh wait, this is interesting. I learned something, or I can hop in and like even like add something new to the conversation too, which is super cool. I guess we all sit pretty close to each other.
yeah, which is super nice.
Yeah.
The reality of like a super long project is that you just need to be surrounded by people that you like. You need to.
that is important.
That is very important. That is very important.
Yeah.
You need to make sure that there's a good motivation behind it. You know, I knew that once this project was going to be shipped, like our customers, like literally all of our customers would see it. Right.
Yeah.
So it had to be good, you know. And it was motivating that like once I did do this thing, like they would all hopefully enjoy it a lot. And you know, there just has to be good motivators for such a big project.
And I think it's also worth noting that there was like a clear like business use case for shipping the facelift, where I think for the past few years we've had conversations about go to Tailwind, let's move to like let's revamp our front end code. There just like wasn't like a reason to. Whereas I think post Series B announcement, post like website redesign, the framing was really like, let's go out and build one of the best. Like we have a lot of customers, we're growing really fast. Over the next 5 years, something that's gonna be really important when it comes to closing customers is truly having the best software product, having the best UI, having the best, just experience in general. And that means that our front end quality has to be world class. And so because of that, the entire team had the buy-in of like, this is one of the most important things we have to do, even though it wasn't something where the entire team had to drop all things and focus on it at the same time.
And hopefully once we've set up this like, this foundational structure, it will just make shipping new product, like net new product, that much faster, or like that much better as well.
And I think we've already been seeing some of the results happening already.
100%.
Yeah, especially I think some of the expense management stuff you're working on is for sure a lot more smooth.
Yeah, that'll be sick. Invoicing too.
Invoicing too, yeah. No, I think a ton of learnings. Like I'd say if you had to go back and do it again, what do you think could have been better?
I think we actually ended up making a lot of the correct overarching decisions. Like for example, not having one big PR, right? Committing to like using feature flags and like code branching, even if it's a little messier, right? Like that was a huge win that we thought of. Maybe we didn't like truly sit down and like analyze the decision, but we ended up doing that correctly. That I would definitely do again.
Yeah.
Like as for the individual design decisions, like that's like sort of up to like, whatever technologies are available at the time. And I think we made good design decisions there.
Yeah.
If there's anything I'd do differently, it might be just like my mindset going into it in the very beginning. My mindset was sort of like, oh, dang, I'm not really sure how I'm going to do all this. Like, and the scope keeps like creeping up, right? And oh my God, this project is like never going to end, right? But I think halfway through I adopted like a more positive mindset, especially once I started, shipping the transactions page and showing it off to like our teammates and whatever. But I think like just having that like trust from the very beginning that, okay, this is important, this needs to get done and it will be very good. I think just like having that trust from the very beginning, I think would have like eased my mind a lot more. And I think like going into future larger projects, I think like that will be my mindset going forwards as well, just like as a learning from the facelift.
Earlier we touched upon the fact that like the team showing up to the office every single day was super helpful in terms of making this project successful in reality. Like how big of a difference do you think that makes? Or do you think it was mainly about like nailing like the technical decisions and getting that part right?
No, being in office definitely helped a lot. Definitely helps a lot, like a ton. It's easy to say in theory, like, oh, like I'll just have a better mindset in, going forwards, or like I wish I had a better mindset in the very beginning. But it's like that's just like so difficult to do if you don't have like a good team around you and you don't see them every day. Like, dude, if I was working remotely, like, dude, it would not have gotten done, honestly, like at the pace that it did. Like, I would have hit so many stuck points. Like I would have been demotivated. Like,
it's also cool. Like I think one thing I've noticed is the first month you typically start a project, things are super happy. It's super interesting. You're solving new problems. And then month 2 comes around and you're like, holy crap, like this sucks. Like it's hard to stay motivated, especially once you're past like 2 months working on the same thing without like any progress. So I guess in a way, like it really requires a ton of agency on your end to push through that, like those blockers, but 2, I guess, being around people that help you stay locked in and help you stay positive about the situation.
100%. Yeah. And I guess if you're seeing this, then the facelift is definitely live. The facelift is live right now. And if you're a customer of Slash, like I hope you enjoy it. There has been a lot of work from the entire engineering team to set this up and make this possible. So we all just like hope you enjoy the new UI. Hopefully it's a lot smoother and a lot faster, and hopefully it serves your business needs well.
It must have been around like September or September, end of August. I remember one day, like you sent a message in Slack at like 5 a.m. and you're like, it's playoff mode, baby. I feel like that was so instrumental to like momentum around the facelift. Like what, I don't know, like what drove you to get into that
That's
state?
when I got over the hump, that's when like I started, I finished the transactions page, I started ripping the cards page, and I realized like, wow, like all of the components I have, or all the components that I need, I now have, right? And now it's just a matter of like, putting these Lego blocks together, right?
Right.
You just keep all the existing business logic the same, and you just like throw these new components together.
Yeah.
Wow, like these are compact components. They're so much nicer to work with. And I was like, oh my God, it's like now like the avalanche has begun, right? I'm able to just like rip new pages, keeping the business logic the same. Boom, like everything is just like now it's just pure front end work.
Yeah.
And it's like you can see it a lot more. It's much more visual.
Yeah.
It's a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Right? And like it's just amazing. And I said that because I was like, oh my God, like I could rip the cards page in like a day or two. Because I laid this like foundation, and it's like, okay, now it's just like time to go ham on like every single page, across the entire product.
How many late nights, like how many nights past like 3 a.m. did you get at the office?
A bunch. Yeah. And that was in the old office too.
That was the old office.
That was the old office. Yeah. A couple sleepless nights for sure. But like, dude, it was so fun. Like,
yeah.
I would do it again for sure.
Definitely not. I think you spent like several nights alone at the office, but I think there are also several nights where you were there with like a few other guys.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like everyone on the team is like in it together.
Yeah, back in college, I know you were working on a bunch of projects with your friends. I was in the same thing. I'd pull all-nighters. Like, you'd just be up till 5 a.m. just shipping things not because we have to. Just
because it's fun.
It's super fun.
And you have so much momentum.
Yeah. And especially like when you think of like working 16 hours, it sounds like a lot of work, but like when you're in like that flow state, people around you are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
It's like pretty fun to like stay up till like 4 or 5 a.m. Next day you sleep in a bit more. I think like those 16-hour blocks are where you get like way more than like 2 8-hour blocks of just like full days of work.
Yeah.
Like you're probably getting the equivalent of like 4 days of work in that super long stretch of time.
Especially like late night when the Slack messages go dark, no more notifications. It's like nobody is bothering you. Like the world just like goes quiet for a little bit, and like you can just like code for like 4 or 5 hours straight.
100%. Yeah. I think a large reason why a lot of people like working here at Slash. So if that's you and you want to find a place where just 100%. Building a lot of cool shit is really fun. You're around people that like doing the same thing as you, that get motivated by just building really cool things.
That like talking about like technical decisions, right? They enjoy talking about like, the intricacies of TypeScript, things like that.
Yeah. No, if you're like that, we would love to work with you, and you should definitely come join us.
Last note, if that was playoff mode, then Hack Week, that was like the finals mode. That was finals, yeah.
Hack Week was finals mode.
Yeah.
I think just working in these sprints especially when the whole team is motivated,
so fun.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like work. Thank you guys. Appreciate it for tuning in. If you made it this far, hopefully you'll apply and join us here at Slash.